Worlds could not be framed in this primal ether, on account of its extreme tenuity and the excess of light, and also because in it remained the vital spirit of the vestige of the light Ein Sof, and that of the vestige of the light of the garment, whereby such manifestation was prevented. Wherefore he directed the letter Yod, since it was not so brilliant as the primal ether, to descend and take to itself the light remaining in the primal ether, and return above, with that vestige which so impeded the manifestation which Yod did. The doctrine of the ether in the Kabbalah. So that the main point only need be mentioned here, or primal, aka primal light, is in both works conceived of as having been originally one with, at any rate bound up in, the primal ether. And its separate existence dates from the moment when the ether entered on its career of condensation, which finally resulted in the formation of the cosmos as we know it. For as is clearly stated in both passages, or primal light, is that which remained of the primal ether, the Anwir, after the transition of the latter into the primary mode of condensation, which is represented by the Nakuda point. It cannot, however, be maintained that a similarity like this, close as it can be shown above, is quite conclusive, for there can be no doubt that several other Kabbalists by the same period held that the same doctrine in a more or less definite form. The same may be said of some other doctrines common to the Zohar and the Shekel HaKadosh, the Holy Shekel. A close study of the Kabbalistic literature of the 13th century will, I believe, disclose the fact that writers like Moses de Leon, Abraham Abu Afia, Menahem Rekanati, and others, differing though they did from each other in method and special line of development, yet moved one and all in the same general atmosphere of thought, and partly also of diction, out of which the finely fantastic theosophy of the Zohar sprang. In reading certain parts of that work, more particularly the Idris Rabbah, or the Idris Sutta, and one almost becomes inclined to vote in favor of a certain company of Kabbalists meeting in conclave, having produced the book rather than a single individual. Be that as it may, no sufficiently conclusive evidence bearing on the origin of the Zohar can be drawn from the special points on which the present paper is designed to treat. All one can say is that Moses de Leon's connection with it appears rather strengthened by a comparison of the number of passages with the Shekel HaKadosh and the Zohar. Turning now more decidedly to the doctrine of the ether, it must be remarked first of all that the Jewish Kabbalah has, by a series of centuries, anticipated one of the most essential ideas embodied in the latest scientific theory regarding the constitution of matter, namely, the idea that the material substances as we know them, or imagine to know them, take their rise in the imponderable and impalpable ether, and are, in fact, a modification of the same. So, they're saying, once again, Kabbalah has been way ahead of its time and predicted where science would end up going. And it's plain as day that modern day quantum physics is flat out Kabbalah dogma, basically, doctrines. So just like this atom thing, where the discovery came after the dogma. What a coincidence that every time they create the dogma, and then later on, their dogma comes to fruition. Their prophecies, so to speak, come to fruition. So continuing on, the electrical part of the theory was, of course, entirely absent from the minds of Moses de Leon and the other Kabbalists concerned. Such a presence of in advance of their age could hardly be expected, even in the most daring thinkers of medieval times, for it would have involved not only a knowledge, however mystical, of the supposed interaction of several still obscure natural forces, but also a wonderful anticipation of the science of electricity itself. So, the science of electricity itself is Kabbalah coming into fruition. But it's remarkable that the pyknotic theory of substance, which, in the words of Haeckel, declares the primitive forces of the world to be the condensation of a simple primitive substance, which fills the infinity of space in an unbroken continuity, is in germ at any rate, contained in the Kabbalistic doctrine, or the point of condensation, which is taken to be the first step in the transition of ether into matter, for it is quite legitimate to compare the Kabbalistic with the minute parts of the universal substance, the centers of condensation, which correspond in general to the ultimate separate atoms of kinetic theory, that regards the vibration of particles in empty space as the primal force of substance, or, to bring the comparison nearer to the development of scientific thought, as elaborated by Professor J.J. Thomson, Sir Oliver Lodge, and others, the Kabbalistic point of condensation may be declared not unlike, barring the idea of electricity, the primordial form of mass, which is defined as a unit of negative electricity in motion, carrying along with it a portion of the surrounding ether. From the science point of view, the Kabbalistic form of the theory is, of course, merely a crude anticipation of the new knowledge or new hypothesis referred to, but in one respect, Moses de Leon and the Kabbalists of kindred modes of thought, may, from their point of view at any rate, claim superiority over the recent theory. For the Kabbalistic doctrine of the ether does not limit itself to matter, but includes the intelligence of the universal as an essential, or rather the essential, force to reckon with. The teaching of the Kabbalists regarding the ether is, as will be seen further on, bound up in the doctrines of the Sephiro or the emanations, which after the crown, identified by Moses de Leon and the others with ether, embrace wisdom, understanding, and spiritual forces of an allied nature. The Kabbalists thus deal with a wider and greater universe than present-day science in its careful self-limitation to the palpable and knowable dares to contemplate. To the Kabbalist, science, whatever he may happen to know of it, is intimately bound up with religion, or rather theosophy. His doctrine of the ether is therefore necessarily a much grander conception than that of science in the usual modern sense of the word, and his point of condensation means much more than expressed by the terms mass, corpuscle, atom, etc. The Kabbalah is, in fact, a system of thought which aims at nothing less than the explanation of the entire universe, both of the visible and the invisible, both of matter and the mind. Okay, so it's a framework of thought. Another important fact which, though already... by the way, framework of thought, you mean like a religious doctrine that you use as a lens to see the world with? Another important fact which, though already briefly indicated, must now be treated more fully, is that although the doctrine of the ether here spoken of does not seem to lie on the surface of Kabbalistic teaching, a closer acquaintance with the literature discloses a considerable agreement with regard to the main proposition. The earliest form in which the doctrine appears in Jewish mysticism is probably found in the Mishnah in question appears briefest in the recension of the tractate attributed to Sadiah Gaon, first printed in the end of the Mantua edition of 1562. It will for our present purpose suffice to translate the longer form of the text as given in the Mantua edition, but it seems best first of all to justify the rendering by the impalpable ether, like a medium that's not physical, but it's impalpable. If atmospheric air, which may of course ordinarily also be spoken of as eluding the grasp of a man's hand, were here meant, it would fit in ill with the statement that something was created out of tohu, and that the existent was produced out of the non-existent. The great pillars or great rocks which were produced out of it are clearly parallel to the existent, and itself to the non-existent. The view that the term in question is to be understood as representing something that is devoid of the nature of matter, was in fact taken by several of the most important commentators. In the commentary attributed to Abraham David, out of the breath of the living God is given as an equivalent. In the Hebrew, so it's the breath of God. Ether is the breath of God. In the Hebrew commentary attributed to Sadiah Gaon, the term is connected with, he suspends the earth upon nothing. And the great and clear-sighted Elijah Gowan of Wilna refers to it as the mystery of the crown of the highest Sephirah. Zohar, which is the written Kabbalah. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Here a beginning is made to lay bare hidden things relating to the creation of the world. The chamber, namely Abba and Ima, which covers the concealed point, which is Arich Anpin, is a light that has no limits. This means that the light of the chamber is also unknown and inconceivable. It's an occult light. It's a hidden light. Nevertheless, it is not as pure and subtle as the light of the primal point, Arich Anpin, which is hidden and concealed. This chamber issues forth an expansion of the primal light, as it is written. And Elohim said, "Let there be light," and there was light. This expansion, Yisrael, Saba, and Tevuna, is a covering for that pure and subtle chamber, namely Abba and Ima, which is more internal than Yisrael, Saba, and Tevuna. The phrase, "Let there be light," alludes to the name Great El, according to the secret of he who issues from the primal air. Hence it is written, "Let there be," implying that the Sephirah of Chesed of Zir Anpin, called Great El, the phrase, "and there was," refers to the secret of the darkness that is called Elohim, and it is called light, after the left was combined with the right, because the name Elohim extends from the secret name El, which is Chesed. Thus, the name Elohim is the aspect of Chesed as well, and the right was included within the left, and the left within the right. El, of course, later on being known as Saturn, it's an ancient Canaanite deity, but that's a whole separate thing. It even became the title name for God, because it's a Canaanite term, or Ugarit. And God saw the light, it was good, in which the participle joined the opaque reflection, Malkut, with the shining reflection, Zir Anpin. This union is what was good, quote unquote. Thus says Rabbi Alazar, includes the angels who come from the side of light and shine as brightly as the primal light. Rabbi Yossi said, the day on which the primal light emerged extended into all other days, as the word day is repeated in them all. Rabbi Alazar, we learn this, they are called mornings because morning only relates to the primal light. Rabbi Shimon said, the first day accompanies all of them, and that are all contained within it. This shows that there's no true distinction between them, and that all are one. In its particular manifestations, for hereto though they were all enfolded in the one universal substance, but henceforth the universal began to be distinguished as universal, particular, and universal. Up to that moment, the all was suspended in the ether, in the mystery of the Ein Sof. But when power began to spread forth in the supernatural Hakal, which is the mystery of Elohim, the term Amira, speech, is used. Elohim said, before that moment, no particular Amira is used. For although Bereshith is also an utterance, the phrase Weyomer, and he said, is not written in connection with it. The Weyomer incites us to investigate and to seek knowledge. The Weyomer is the power whereby Tamuna was made in silence from the mystery of the Ein Sof by the mystery of thought. And the Elohim said, it was then that the Hakal brought forth that which it had conceived of the holy seed, and there was light, namely the light that had been before, the light being that hidden mystery which spread forth and broke out from the deeply concealed mystery of the supernatural Anwir. Okay? The Aether. It broke forth at the beginning and produced out of its mystery the one hidden point. The Ein Sof, having broken forth out of the Anwer and manifested that point, namely the letter, and when that Yod had been produced, that which was left of the mystery of the hidden Aether was Or, light. Freemasonry, and this is the 3 sections coming up. The modern vehicle for Kabbalah. Theosophy, the world's biggest Kabbalistic cult. Tesla, Lucifer personified. Freemasonry, modern vehicle for Kabbalah. And right away, we're going to start with someone who doesn't need an introduction. Just a moment. Okay, we're going straight into morals and dogma. What light is, we know more than the ancients did. According to the modern hypothesis, it is not composed of luminous particles shot out from the sun with immense velocity, but that body only impresses on the ether which fills all space. A powerful vibratory moment that extends in the form of luminous waves beyond the most distant planets, supplying them with light and heat. To the ancients, it was an outflowing from the deity, meaning the Ein Sof. To us, as to them, it is the apt symbol of truth and knowledge. To us, also, the upward journey of the soul through the spheres is symbolical, but we are as little informed as whence the soul comes, where it has its origin, and whether it goes after death. They endeavored to have some belief and faith, some creed upon those points. Their doctrines resembled the ancient Sabiism, and being the faith of the Hiram the king and his namesake the artist are of interest to all Masons. With them, the first principle was half material, man, I can't talk again today, half spiritual, a dark air, animated and impregnated by the spirit, and disordered chaos, covered with thick darkness. From this came the word, and thence creation and generation, and thence a race of men, children of light, who adored heaven and its stars as the supreme being, and whose different gods were but incarnations of the sun, the moon, and the stars, and the ether. Chrysor was the great ingenious power of nature, and Baal and Malakarth, representations of the sun and moon, in the latter word, in Hebrew, meaning queen. Man had fallen, but not by the tempting of the serpent, for with the Phoenicians the serpent was deemed to partake of the divine nature, and was sacred, as he was in Egypt. He was deemed to be immortal, unless slain by violence, becoming young again in his old age by entering into and consuming himself. Expiation and the test of water, air, and fire were represented, by means of which, during the march of many years, the soul could be purified and rise towards the ethereal regions. That ascent being more or less tedious and laborious, according as each soul was more or less clogged by the gross impediments of its sin and vices, herein the shadow forth. In a fragment of the same writer, preserved by Stobius, we learn that the initiate, up to the moment when his initiation is to be consummated, is alarmed by every kind of sight. That astonishment and terror take his soul captive. He trembles. Cold sweat flows from his body, until the moment when the light is shown him, a most astounding light, brilliant scene of Elysium, where he sees charming meadows overarched by the clear sky, and festivals celebrated by the dances, where he hears harmonious voices in the majestic chants of the hierophants, and the views from the sacred spectacles. Then, absolutely free and enfranchised from the dominion of all ills, he mingles with the crowd of initiates, and crowned with flowers, celebrates with them the holy orgies in brilliant realms of the ether, and dwelling place of the Ormazd. In the mysteries of Isis, the candidate first passed through the dark valley of the shadow of death, then in a place representing the elements or sublunary world, where the two principles clash and contend, and was finally admitted to a luminous region where the sun, with his most brilliant light, put to rout the shades of night. Then he himself put on the costume of the sun god, or the visible source of the ethereal light. We're getting to the core of Luciferianism in its ether. Okay, continuing on. Then he put himself on the costume of the sun god, or the visible source of the ethereal light, in whose mysteries he was initiated, and passed from the empire of darkness to that of light. After having set his feet on the threshold of the palace of Pluto, he ascended to the Empyrean, to the bosom of the eternal principal light of the universe, from which all souls and intelligence emanate. See the word emanate? This is Kabbalah, hardcore Kabbalah right here. Because in Kabbalah, the Ein Sof, basically the source, emanated down, and the further away it gets from the source, the more evil it is, and the more palpable matter it becomes. They want to return back up Jacob's ladder. If Albert Pike was alive today, he would probably be doing presentations on the impalpable background medium, ether. Okay, continuing on. Those who descend through their own fault go from world to world, insensibly losing their love of divine things in their self-contemplation until they reach the world Azaeth, falling by their own weight. This is pure Platonism clothed with the images and words particular to the Kabbalists. It was the doctrine of the Essenes who, says Porphyry, believed that the souls descend from the most subtle ether, attracted to the bodies by the seductions of matter. It was in substance the doctrine of origin, and it came from the Chaldeans, who largely studied the theory of the heavens, the spheres, and the influences of the signs and constellations. The Gnostics made souls ascend and descend through 8 heavens, in which each were certain powers that opposed their return, and often drove them back to earth when not sufficiently purified. The last of these powers, nearest the luminous abode of souls, was a serpent or dragon. I've actually heard some flat earthers, for example, say that the planets and things up there are there to stop us from ascending through Polaris. If that's not Kabbalah. The Chaldean triad consisted of Bel, the Persian Zervana Atharena, Oromasdes, and Ahriman, the good and evil principle alike outflowing from the Father by their equilibrium and alternating preponderance to produce harmony. Each was to rule in turn for equal periods until finally the evil principle should itself become good. The Chaldean and Persian oracles of Zoroaster give us the triad: fire, light, and ether. Orpheus celebrates the triad of Phanes, Ouranos, and Kronos. Corey says the Orphic trinity consisted of Metis, Phanes, and Erecapeus, will, light, or love, and life. Ausilius makes it consist of Metis, Eros, and ether, will, love, and ether. Phericides of Syros of water, fire, water, and air or spirit. In the two former we readily recognize Osiris and Isis, the sun and the Nile. The first 3 of the Persian Shaspanaz, I'm saying stuff so wrong, sorry, were Bahman, the Lord of Light, Artabehest, the Lord of Fire, and Shariver, the Lord of Splendor. These once lead us back to the Kabbalah. Plutarch says, quote, "The better and diviner nature consists of the 3, the intelligible, that and which exists only the intellect only as yet, and matter, and that which proceeds from these, which the Greeks called cosmos, of which Plato calls the intelligible, the idea, the exemplar, the father, the matter, the mother, the nurse, and the receptacle and place of generation, and the issue of these 2, the offspring in Genesis. Moreover, It has one of the properties of the number 9, that of reproducing itself when multiplied by itself, there being always a 5 on the right hand of the product, a result which led to its use as a symbol of material changes. The ancient represented the world by the number 5. A reason for it, given by Detour, is that it represents earth, water, fire, ether, and spirit. Thence the origin of the 5 in the universe as the whole, the pentagram, by the way. The number 5 designated the universal quintessence and symbolized by its form the vital essence, the animating spirit which flows through all nature. In fact, this ingenious figure is the union of the two Greek accents placed over those vowels which ought to be and ought not to be aspirated. The first sign bears the name of the potent spirit and signifies the superior spirit, the spirit of God aspirated, spiratus, respirated by man. The second sign is styled mild spirit and represents the secondary spirit, the spirit purely human. The triple triangle, a figure of 5 lines uniting 5 points, was among the Pythagoreans an emblem of health. It is the pentaalpha of Pythagoras, or the pentacle of Solomon, has 5 lines and 5 angles, and is among Masons the outline or origin of the 5-pointed star, an emblem of fellowship. And then the hexagram is actually the completion of the path. That's a whole other thing. This ideal was not the dogma of the single sect, but the general opinion of all the sages. Allegedly. Nature was divided, says Cicero, into 2 parts, one active and the other one submitted itself to this action, which it received and which modified it. The former was deemed to be a force, and the latter of material on which that force exerted itself. Macrobius repeated almost literally the doctrine of Ocellus. Aristotle termed the earth the fruitful mother, environed on all its sides by air. Above it was heaven, the dwelling place of the gods, and the divine stars, its substance ether, or a fire incessantly moving in circles, divine and incorruptible, and subject to no change. Below it, nature and the elements, mutable and acted upon, corruptible and mortal. Virgil sings the impregnation of the joyous earth by the ether, its spouse, that descends upon the bosom, fertilizing it with rains. Columella sings the loves of nature in her marriage with heaven, annually consummated by the sweet springtime. He describes the spirit of life, the soul that animates the world, fired with the passion of love, uniting with nature and itself a part of nature, and filling its own bosom with new productions. This union of the universe with itself, this mutual action of 2 sexes, he turned into great secrets of nature. The mysteries of the union of heaven and earth, imagined in the sacred mysteries of Attis and Bacchus. The division of all things into the active and passive cause leads to that of the 2 principles of light and darkness, connected with and corresponding with it. For light comes from the ethereal substance that composes the active cause, and darkness from the earth or the gross matter which composes the passive cause. In Hesiod, the earth, by its union with Tartarus, engenders Typhon, chief of the powers of the genii of darkness. It unites itself with the ether or Uranus, when it engenders the gods of Olympus or the stars, children of starry Uranus. Light was the first divinity worshipped by men. To it they owed the brilliant spectacle of nature. It seems an emanation from the creator of all things, Kabbalistic terminology, making known to our senses the universe which darkness hides in our eyes, and as it were giving it existence. Darkness, as it were, reduces all nature again to nothingness and almost entirely annihilates man. There is a life principle of the world, a universal agent, wherein are 2 natures in a double current of love and wrath. This ambient fluid penetrates everything. It is a ray detached from the glory of the sun and fixed by the weight of the atmosphere and the central attraction. It is the body of the Holy Spirit, the universal agent, the serpent devouring its own tail. The Ouroboros. With this electromagnetic ether, This vital and luminous caloric, the ancients and the alchemists were familiar. Of this agent, that phase of modern ignorance termed physical science talks incoherently, knowing not of it save its effects, and theology might apply to all its pretended definitions of spirit. Quiescent, it is appreciable by no human sense, disturbed or in movement. None can explain its mode of action, and to term it a fluid, quote unquote, and speak of its, quote, currents, is but to veil a profound ignorance under a cloud of words. So basically, using words like fluid and currents and background medium or the word medium, this is like, I'm just trying to use my human words to describe something that's indescribable. Right? Yet our own holy writings continually speak of him as light, and therefore the Sabians and the Kabbalah may well be pardoned for doing the same, especially since they did not regard him as a visible light known to us, but the primordial ether ocean from which light flows. Like in that, what was it, Deep Space Nine, that Star Trek series, where that dude, Odo, returns back to the ocean, and they become one again. To conceive of God as an actuality and not as a mere non-substance or name, which involved non-existence, the Kabbalah, like the Egyptians, imagined him to be a most occult light. Not of our material and visible light, but the substance out of which light flows, the fire, as relative to its heat and flame. Of this light, or ether, the sun was to the Sabians the only manifestation or outshining, and as such it was worshipped, and not as the type of dominion and power. God was the Phos, Noton, the light cognizable only by the intellect, the light principle, the light ether, from which souls emanate and to which they return. This is Kabbalistic doctrine. I could end it right there. But I'm not going to. Moving on a little bit with Albert Pike, and then I'm going to end this first part, because I'm going to break this down into 3 things, or else it's going to become too long. The Chaldean oracle said, the intellect of the generator, stirred up to action, outspoke, forming within itself by intellection universals of every possible form and fashion, which issued out, flowing forth from the one source. For deity, aka Ein Sof, impersonated as Dunlinian, before fabricating the manifold universe, posited an intellected and unchangeable universal, the impression of the form whereof goes forth through the universe, and that universe, formed and fashioned accordingly, becomes visibly beautified in infinitely varying types and forms. The source and fountain whereof is one. Intellectual conceptions and forms of the generative source, succeeding each other, considered in relation to the ever-progressing time, and intimately partaking of the primal ether or fire. But yet all these universals and primal types and ideas flowed forth from, and are part of, the first source of the generative power, perfect in itself. The Chaldeans termed the supreme deity Araor, the father of light. From him was supposed to flow the light above the world, which illuminates the heavenly regions. This light or fire was considered as the symbol of the divine essence, extending itself to inferior spiritual natures. Hence the Chaldean oracles say, the Father took from himself and did not confine his proper fire with his intellectual potency. All things are begotten from one fire. This light of the vestige of the garment is said to be relatively to that vestige of the substance, like a point in the center of a circle. There goes that symbol. This light, a point at the center of the great light, is called R, ether, or space. This ether is somewhat more gross than the light, not so subtle, though not perceptible by the senses, is termed the primal ether, extends everywhere. Philosophers call it the soul of the world. The light so forth shown from the deity cannot be said to be severed or diverse from him. It is flashed forth from, yet all continues to be perfect unity. The Sephiro, sometimes called the persons of the deity, are his rays by which he is enabled most perfectly to manifest himself. So this presentation I'm doing has nothing to do with science, obviously, and neither does Ether. This is a religious presentation because it's a religious dogma, or doctrine, I mean. So I'm not here to debate how light works or anything like that. I'm doing something very specific. And when you hear people saying, oh, there's nothing scientific about ether, you can't break it down materially, but it's a framework to view the world with. It's a framework to view truth and how the world actually works. When you're talking about a framework, you're talking about a lens. You're talking about a Kabbalistic lens in this specific case. This vacant space was square and is called the primal space, and in Kabbalah it is called Ara Kadma, or Razimu Allah, the primal space, or the sublime vestige. It is the vestige of the light of the garment, with which it is intermingled somewhat of the vestige of the very substance. It is called the primal ether, but not void space. The light of the vestige still remains in place it occupied, and adheres there like somewhat spiritual of extreme tenuity. In this ether are two lights, that is, the light of the substance, which was taken away, and that of the garment. There is a vast difference between the two, for that the vestige of the garment is, relatively to that vestige of the substance, like a point in the center of a circle, and as only appropriate name for the light of the vestige of vestige of Ein Sof is R, light. Therefore, the light of the vestige of the garment could not be called by that name, and so we term it a point, that is Yod, which is the point in the center of a light, and light, a point in the center of the great light, is called R, ether, or space. This ether is somewhat more gross than the light, not so subtle, though not perceptible by the senses. Where have we heard this rhetoric before? Is termed the primal ether, extends everywhere, whence philosophers call it the soul of the world. Light is visible, though not perceptible. This ether is neither perceptible nor visible. Where have you heard this rhetoric? The introduction to the book Zohar continues in the section of the letter Yod, etc. Worlds could not be framed in this primal ether on account of its extreme tenuity and excess of light, and also because in it remained the vital spirit of the vestige of the light Ein Sof, and that of the vestige of the light of the garment, whereby such manifestation was prevented. Wherefore he directed the letter Yod, since it was not so brilliant as the primal ether, to descend and take to itself the light remaining in the primal ether, and return above, with that vestige which so impeded the manifestation which Yod did. The first atom in the 10 circles above the splendor is called the first occult atom, and in each of these spaces are formed many thousand worlds. The first atom is involved in the primal ether, and is an analog of the world Bina, or Binah. The double triangle of Solomon is explained by St. John in a remarkable manner. There are, he says, 3 witnesses in heaven, the Father, the Word, and the Holy Spirit, and 3 witnesses on earth, the breath, water, and blood. He thus agrees with the masters of the Hermetic philosophy, who give their sulfur the name of ether, to their mercury the name of the philosophical water, to their salt that of the blood of the dragon, or the menstruum of the earth. The blood or salt corresponds by opposition with the Father, the azothic or mercurial water, with the Word, or Logos, and the breath with the Holy Spirit. But the things of high symbolism can well be understood only by the true children of science with a capital S. And all that void also is the mysterious and ever-active electricity and heat and omnipresent ether. At the will of God, the invisible becomes visible. Two invisible gases, combined with the action of the force of God and compressed, become and remain a water that fills the great basins of the seas, flows in the rivers and rivulets, leaps forth from the rocks and springs, drops upon the earth and rains, or whitens it with snows, and bridges with the Danubes with ice, or gathers in vast reservoirs in the earth's bosom. God manifested fills all the extensions which we foolishly call empty space and the void, an all-permeating ether. Okay, in all, I already did that one. What light is, okay, tell me if you've heard this before. What light is, we no more know than the ancients did. According to the modern hypothesis, it is not composed of luminous particles shot out from the sun with immense velocity, but that body only impresses on the ether which fills all space a powerful vibratory movement that extends in the form of luminous waves beyond the most distant planets, supplying them with light and heat. To the ancients, it was an outflowing from the deity, aka Ein Sof. To us, as to them, it is the apt symbol of truth and knowledge. To us, also, the upward journey of the soul through the spheres is symbolical, but we are as little informed as where the soul comes, where it has its origin, and where it goes after death. They endeavored to have some belief and faith, some creed upon those points. And with that, I'm going to conclude this first section, because it'd be way too long if I did the whole thing all in one shot. Next, of course, will be Theosophy, which at its core is Kabbalah, which Kabbalah is basically at the core of every modern day cult. Most modern day cults, I would say, including the Scientism cult, including quantum physics, whatever you want to name. What is at the core of it? Kabbalah. And what are the Kabbalists trying to do? They're trying to achieve Tikkun Olam. They believe that the non-small hats, quote unquote, they believe that the G-O-Y-I-M, they believe that they don't have the divine spark, that the divine spark is just attached to the top of their head, basically, and that they possess real souls, the real divine spark, and they want to eliminate all physical matter, including the G-O-Y-I-M, including them, because once they annihilate them, those divine sparks will separate from them, and they will descend down into the evil matter and darkness, because they believe that the emanations come down from the Ein Sof, from the source, and that the further away it gets, the more evil it becomes. So they're trying to destroy all the non-small hats and this physical earth to raise the earth up to the seventh heaven where Saturn reigns. This is a highly dangerous cult, and that's why I did this presentation, because there's been a lot of talk about Aether lately in modern times, with truthers and all that even. And it's not a new doctrine. Okay, this is possessed by people who want to destroy you. They want to destroy this earth. They talk about climate change and all this stuff and how we're destroying the earth. They are trying to eliminate the physical realm, basically. These are psychotic, Gnostic Kabbalists. Okay, so I'm going to end it right there, and then I will get the next part 2 out once I can. Thank you guys for coming. Peace out.